You push my newborn into a pool, and you think I won't press attempted manslaughter? Marlene Datch didn't flinch. Not when I shouted. Not when Aaron's float struck the water. Not even when my daughter's panicked screams sliced through the heavy Georgia air. Marlene, president of the Hollow Crest Haven HOA, just stood there, arms folded, chin lifted like the queen of some twisted suburban inquisition. "That device is non-compliant," she said coldly. "I was demonstrating its risk to the community." She pushed a 6-month-old into 8 feet of water and called it a demonstration. I was already moving before her sentence ended. My clipboard hit the pavement. My shirt tore at the collar. My feet left the concrete and struck the pool surface with one sound. Justice incoming. Aaron's float bobbed once, then tipped. She shrieked. She choked. I cut through the water like I'd done 100 times on inspection dives, except this wasn't theory, and this wasn't training. This was my baby, and Marlene had no idea the float she shoved was wired. She didn't know about the submersion sensor I embedded behind the foam lining. She didn't know the moment it tilted, it pinged back to my secure server. Timestamp, angle, pressure data, all of it. And Peneloric, 3rd unit from the right. She filmed the whole thing for HOA archives. But this time, she didn't delete it. This time, she watched something real and flinched. Subscribe now, because this isn't a warning. It's what happens when an HOA president crosses the wrong line, in front of the wrong man, with the wrong child in the water. I'm Oren Kellis. I write liability codes for aquatic parks. I evaluate drown risk for public venues. I've inspected pools for failures that cost families everything. What I'm not? Someone who rolls over because a clipboard-wielding tyrant wants matching hedges. I moved here after Mira and I lost our first daughter during birth. Hollow Crest looked safe, stable, quiet, the kind of place where families could exhale. So I installed a removable mesh fence for our pool, approved by Georgia law, vetted by 3 counties. And I designed a buoyant, no-tip float for Aaron's water therapy sessions. Mira's doctor said gentle water exposure might help her early nerve development. But Marlene didn't ask questions. She issued violations. She said my fence interrupted visual cohesion, that the float projected commercial intent. She fined us $500 and threatened to file a lien if I didn't remove both. We removed the fence. But I didn't back down. I documented everything. Every HOA code, every inconsistency. I watched her approve a lot, where a back gate opened directly into a retention pond, without a child lock. Still, we showed up to the HOA's safety awareness event, like they asked. I brought the float. Aaron smiled in it. Neighbors cooed, cameras clicked. Then Marlene walked over and said, "This isn't safety, it's spectacle." And before anyone could blink, she shoved the float forward. That sound, the splash, replaced the delivery room silence I'll never forget. Mira collapsed onto her knees. My chest hit the water. Aaron's cry turned to choking. The neighbors froze. The board members stared. And Marlene. Marlene adjusted her sunglasses and said, "Now, imagine if it hadn't been supervised." Imagine that. Imagine telling a father, me, that this was some sort of social experiment. The baby float was made to withstand waves, torsi, and sudden tipping, but it wasn't made to withstand ego, or a president who thought her position meant power over pain. Now she's going to learn what position really means. When the state inspectors read the risk log I pulled, when the insurer sees what demonstration looks like on video, when the neighbors realize the woman citing infant toys just endangered the only child in the community born this year. This isn't over, because that float still holds water. And so does the case I'm building. Where are you watching from? Because from where I'm standing, the HOA just declared war on the wrong dad. The citations didn't start with the fence. They started with our trash can. Violation number 314, the letter read, printed on smooth HOA stationery and slid into our mailbox without so much as a knock. Trash receptacle visible from street between 7:05 a.m. and 7:19 a.m. on a non-collection day. $75 fine. I stared at the envelope for a long time, not because of the absurdity of the timestamp, but because Mira had just returned from the pediatrician, alone, with Aaron, and tears in her eyes. Our daughter's oxygen levels had dipped during sleep, and they wanted to monitor her more closely. Meanwhile, Marlene Datch's biggest concern was a bin on wheels. That was the first citation. The second came 3 days later. Unauthorized flotation device displayed in open view. The third came with a photo. My own daughter and her float laughing. No warning, just fines. Each one wrapped in language that looked like law but felt like punishment. It didn't take long to realize we weren't the only ones. I started walking the neighborhood, quietly, just observing. The Delgado family, 3 streets over, got cited for a decorative security grill inconsistent with community aesthetics. Their son uses a walker. The grill kept him from rolling off the porch. Now it's gone. A new couple, the Balls, had their solar panels flagged as non-standard surface reflectors. They were professionally installed, but Marlene personally called their installer a distraction to aircraft. And the pattern kept going. If you had a child, a medical exception, or anything that broke the illusion of Hollow Crest Haven's Stepford perfection, the violations found you. I kept records, quiet ones. I didn't threaten, didn't escalate. I measured, compared, verified. But Marlene escalated. She stopped looking at Mira when we crossed paths. She looked at Aaron like she was noise, a variable she hadn't accounted for. One morning, I watched her stand in the cul-de-sac with a tablet and stylus, tapping each home as if tallying up compliance scores. She glanced at my house, paused, then tapped 3 times. The next letter came with a board directive. Mr. and Mrs. Kellis, please refrain from displaying industrial-grade flotation or aquatic testing equipment in common areas or during HOA-sanctioned events. This includes safety devices, branded prototypes, or gear that may be interpreted as promotional in nature. It wasn't promotional. It was our child's therapy. The float wasn't for show. It was for movement, spine alignment, oxygen development, and they knew that. We submitted the documentation. They didn't care. Mira asked me if we should just stop bringing Aaron outside. I didn't answer her, because that wasn't a real question. We weren't the ones who needed to hide. Still, I tried to play it straight, filed appeals, requested reviews, offered to meet. Marlene never responded directly. Her assistant forwarded rejections, signed with digital stamps. Review denied due to policy precedent. Board action sufficient per charter clause. No one on the board questioned her, not openly, except once. During a community harmony event, I spotted Horst Greeley standing near the clubhouse fountain, alone with a clipboard. I asked him how many citations he had had to sign off that week. He flinched. "It's not personal," he muttered. "It's compliance." "Would you sign one against your own grandson?" I asked. He looked at Aaron, swaddled against Mira's chest, half asleep. Then he turned and walked away. That told me everything. Horst didn't believe in what he was enforcing, but he wasn't going to stop her either. Not yet. But I could feel it shifting, slow, quiet, like the ripple before a storm. Marlene's grip on the board wasn't built on law. It was built on silence. And silence cracks. I just had to keep recording. Because Hollow Crest violations weren't about grass height or siding color. They were about control. And eventually, control slips. Especially when a baby becomes the threat. Especially when a father doesn't scare easy. Especially when the float they push turns out to be evidence. The kind they'll wish never existed. Horst Greeley always wore the same beige vest to the HOA meetings, even in the heat. The collar was frayed, the zipper stuck at the chest, and the embroidered compliance officer patch had faded to a soft gray. He was the only member of the board who never raised his voice, never smiled for the photo ops, and never stayed longer than necessary. I used to think he was harmless, just old, maybe tired. But after the citations started stacking like sandbags at our front door, I started paying closer attention. It was at the quarterly HOA, Home Enhancement Review, when I saw him hesitate. Marlene had just finished presenting a slideshow on visual inconsistencies. One of the photos on her slide showed our float, snapped from behind a shrub, angled to make it look like a tangle of cords and tubing. There was even a red arrow pointing to it, with the words unauthorized device in all caps. I saw Horst shift in his chair. Marlene said, "Some homeowners are using unregulated flotation systems, potentially putting children at risk and creating legal liability for our association." Her eyes never left mine, not once. But Horst looked down. He tapped his pen once, twice, then stopped. His jaw tightened. After the meeting, I followed him out, waited until we were clear of the others. He didn't look surprised when I stepped beside him. That photo was taken from my backyard, I said calmly. Between 6:30 and 6:45 a.m., no one had permission to enter. He kept walking, slower now. She shouldn't have used that picture, he muttered, but you didn't object. I didn't approve it either. I stopped. Horst, do you know what's in that float? It's not a toy. It's medical equipment. It's part of Aaron's therapy regimen, signed off by a pediatric neurologist. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. I have the forms. I sent them twice. Another nod. Then why are you signing off on the fines? He stopped walking. The breeze lifted the corner of his vest. He stared straight ahead. Because every time someone questions her, they don't get re-elected, he said quietly. Because I've got 2 years left on this house before I move closer to my daughter. And because it's easier not to. I let that sit between us. It was cowardice, sure, but not the kind that hides malice, just fear. Then you know what she is, I said, and what she's doing to families like mine. He looked at me for the first time then. His eyes were tired, but not empty. Your wife, he said. She looked scared when Marlene pushed that float. She thought our daughter was about to drown. She looked like she remembered something worse. That stopped me, hard. He wasn't wrong. Mira hadn't spoken more than a few sentences since the incident. She clutched Aaron tighter at night. She double-checked the baby monitor even during naps. She barely looked at the pool anymore. Horst shuffled away without another word. But that line, about Mira, echoed louder than anything Marlene had ever screamed. That's when I knew Horst saw more than he let on. And he felt it. The guilt. The weight of being complicit. He wasn't ready to act. Not yet. But he was cracking. The next morning, I found a sealed envelope slid beneath our door. Inside was a printed photo, dated 2 days before the safety event. It showed Marlene at the pool, alone. She was holding something, a training doll, infant-sized. She had one hand pressed to the edge of a float. It was a rehearsal. No name, no note, no signature. But I knew where it came from, and it meant someone on the inside was finally done pretending. Marlene didn't waste time after the pool incident. Within 48 hours, she sent out a community-wide memo titled Clarification Regarding Safety Demonstration Incident. The subject line alone made my fists clench. She didn't mention Aaron by name. She called her a minor occupant. She didn't call it a push. She called it a simulated hazard evaluation. She claimed it was an exaggerated demonstration to illustrate potential dangers of unauthorized flotation prototypes during HOA events. She blamed the float. She blamed me. She blamed confusion caused by non-standard devices. I wasn't surprised. I was disgusted. 2 hours later, I received a direct email from the HOA board's shared account. Notice of formal review. Potential suspension of membership rights. They were investigating my conduct, not hers, mine. The accusation? Introducing unauthorized safety equipment and engaging in unapproved demonstrations that caused distress to community members. No mention of the push, no mention of Marlene, no mention of the baby. Just a quiet threat. Cooperate, or we'll strip your voting rights and gate privileges. I'd expected them to retreat after the incident. Instead, they doubled down. And that meant one thing. Marlene wasn't scared. She thought she was untouchable. I forwarded the email to myself, saved it twice, printed a hard copy. Then I opened a folder on my desktop and labeled it what it really was. Intent to silence. Later that day, while Mira rocked Aaron in the living room, I stepped outside to clear my head. That's when I saw them, 2 men I didn't recognize, measuring the fence around the community pool. One held a laser level, the other scrolled through a PDF on a tablet. I asked them what they were doing. Visual barrier assessments, one of them replied. HOA directive, President Datch's orders. I glanced at the PDF. I caught the header before he pulled it back. Phase 1. Common Area Compliance Review. Marlene was preparing to overhaul the community's safety infrastructure, and not in a good way, not to strengthen it, to erase it, to rewrite the rules to fit her narrative and bury her mistake beneath policy. I called Mira's brother that night. He's a municipal safety inspector in Savannah. I asked him to send me a current copy of Georgia's public access compliance mandates for recreational pool facilities. He did. I cross-checked it with Hollowcrest Haven's published HOA codebook. That's when I found it. In black and white, plain as day. HOA-led safety demonstrations involving minor occupants require prior legal waiver signed by parent or guardian, plus medical clearance if the occupant is under 12 months of age. There was no waiver, no clearance, no permission. Marlene had violated her own bylaws, not just state policy. She broke both, and she did it in public, with witnesses. That same night, Penna texted me. One sentence. I didn't delete the footage. She attached the full video, 37 seconds. Crystal clear. It started with Aaron giggling in the float, Marlene approaching, a quick exchange, then the shove. The audio captured everything, even her words. Let's see if this thing can float for real. The neighbors had all heard it, but hearing it again, recorded, my breath caught. Mira sat beside me as it played, silent, still. Her hand gripped the edge of the couch so hard her knuckles went white. When it ended, she didn't cry. She whispered, she meant it. I nodded. And then I stood. I opened my file drawer, pulled out the binder labeled Kelly's Inspections, 2022-2024. Inside were every safety audit I'd ever run in a residential community, every violation I'd flagged, every photo, every measurement. Mira looked up. What are you doing? Collecting receipts, I said. If she wants to escalate this, then so will I. Because I don't lose people to water. Not again. Not while I'm still standing. And not while the HOA president who pushed my newborn into a pool thinks this ends with a memo. The first property I checked was Marlene's own. Lot in 24, East Cul-de-sac, her pale stucco townhouse with the potted cypress trees. She made a whole row of us remove last year. Her backyard backed into the lake, just like ours. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for facts. She had no child fencing, no rear barrier, just an open slope down to the water and a crumbling retaining wall marked by loose bricks and cracked concrete. Not just unsafe, negligent. And I knew exactly how to measure it. I took photos from the sidewalk, measured the wall's tilt with my angle finder, logged the gap in the lower barrier where the concrete had shifted. The lake had already eroded more than 4 inches past the original boundary line. The HOA had done nothing to reinforce it. That wasn't just poor maintenance. That was exposure. The same week she cited me for unsafe infant flotation. Her own backyard failed 3 state-level criteria for water-adjacent dwellings. And it wasn't just her. The Stenbergs' home had an unlatched gate to their in-ground spa. The Doyles had no pool signage despite hosting 2 birthday parties that month, yet none of them had received citations. I cross-referenced HOA records, thankfully still accessible online for any registered resident. Only 5 homes had been cited for safety issues in the past 18 months. All 5 had children under the age of 2. 3 of them, including us, had submitted doctor notes or therapy requests. It wasn't enforcement. It was targeting. I added every photo, timestamp, measurement, and citation to a working spreadsheet I titled Hollow Crest Compliance Disparity Log. 32 properties inspected, 17 clear violations. Only 5 cited. All 5 had one thing in common: deviation from Marlene's standard view. Baby gates, medical devices, adaptive railings. She wasn't just avoiding the rules, she was weaponizing them. I emailed Mira's brother again and asked him for a quiet favor, an informal review, just a second pair of eyes to verify that I wasn't misreading the legal standards. He replied in 20 minutes. This isn't borderline, Oren. These are violations. If this were city property, they'd already have a hearing. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Mira walked in with Aaron asleep against her shoulder. She saw the photos spread across the table. You're building a case? She asked, her voice flat. I'm proving pattern, I said. She sat. And what does that get us? I looked at her. Leverage. Not just to protect our daughter, but to make sure Marlene never did this again. The next day, I took a walk with Aaron in the stroller. Mira needed sleep, and I needed space. At the far end of the lake path, I spotted Horst. He was kneeling near the community dock, writing something on a clipboard. I approached slowly. What are you measuring? I asked. He looked up, startled, then sighed. Dock height, new compliance initiative. Under Marlene? He didn't answer, just tapped the board twice. You saw the email, didn't you? I said. They're investigating me now. I did. And that doesn't bother you? His eyes flicked toward the lake. More than you know. I crouched beside him and took out my phone, opened a photo of Marlene's backyard, retaining wall, slope, no barrier. This is hers, I said. Taken 2 days ago. Do you want to guess how many violations are in this single shot? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I stood. I'm filing with the state next week. Everything. If there's one thing HOA insurers and liability boards hate more than citations, it's selective enforcement tied to personal bias. Horst stood slowly. You're not bluffing. No? He looked down at the clipboard. If she retaliates, I'm counting on it, I said. That'll only make the hole she's digging deeper. He nodded once. Then maybe it's time someone told the truth. Then he walked away, slower than before, but not retreating. The spreadsheet in my hand wasn't just data anymore. It was a fuse. And Marlene had just given me the match. Mira didn't ask where I'd gone when I got home. She was sitting at the kitchen island, one hand gripping her tea, the other resting gently on Erin's head as she dozed in the carrier across Mira's chest. She's been waking up from naps gasping, she said softly. I didn't respond right away. I knew better than to fill that kind of silence with noise. They said it's likely trauma, she added. Stress imprinting. Babies don't have memory the way we do, but they have fear. Her eyes met mine, hollow and steady. So what now? Do we just wait until she's old enough to forget? Or do we fix this? I pulled the folded photo from my pocket, the one of Marlene rehearsing her little safety demonstration with a training doll. I'm not waiting anymore, I said. I'm pulling every record, every inspection log, every contradiction. If they want this to be about rules, then I'll show them rules they've ignored for years. Mira exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since that day at the pool. She nodded once, the smallest crack of light in a wall of exhaustion. That night, I started the grid. A comprehensive HOA audit spreadsheet wasn't what most fathers made in the aftermath of trauma, but it was what I knew. I labeled tabs by issue: fence infractions, water barriers, inspection discrepancies, board-level exemptions, and unsighted hazards in occupied homes. I didn't stop until dawn. 26 pages of comparative documentation, 16 photos from public sidewalks, 3 board emails, 1 neighbor's anonymous video file, 2 insurance rider clauses that Marlene's citations directly violated, and 1 formal discrepancy summary tied directly to her lot. I knew how these systems worked. I'd spent years consulting on them. Insurance companies didn't care about neighborhood drama, but they cared about systemic liability, patterns, precedents. And what I was building wasn't a protest. It was a trigger. All I needed was a few more pieces. Proof that Horst wasn't the only one who had doubts. Something that showed Marlene had help, and that someone was ready to flip. I found it the next morning on the back porch. A thin envelope, hand-folded, no name. Inside was a copy of an unsigned waiver, the kind required for any HOA event involving children near water. It was blank, no witness initials, no timestamp. But the header read, Event Authorization, Pool Safety Demonstration, out at 6:04. The date of the incident. There were 3 lines for signatures, 1 for a parent or guardian, 1 for the HOA officer authorizing the event, 1 for the participating staff. All 3 blank. I knew what that meant. Whoever left this didn't just want me to know the waiver didn't exist. They wanted me to have the document itself. The paper trembled slightly in my hand, not from fear, from validation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't just a father with a chip on his shoulder. They were covering for her. Or they had been. Until now. I scanned the document into my archive, labeled it Exhibit B. Then I pulled the original float out of the shed. It was dry now, coiled neatly in its storage strap, sensors disabled but intact. I turned it over in my hands, ran my fingers along the pressure patch near the base. Erin had loved this thing. She used to giggle when the mesh sides crinkled in the sun. But now she whimpered when I brought it into the house. I packed it back away gently, like it was something sacred, because it was. And it would be again. The phone rang while I was cleaning up. It was Mira's brother. I spoke to someone in the State Board's review office. He said, off the record, if you submit what you've got through the whistleblower channel, it triggers an internal liability review. No vote required. It forces an insurer to freeze reevaluation of community risk. They'll start asking questions, loud ones. That was it, the tipping point. I ended the call and stared out at the pool where Aaron had almost drowned under HOA supervision. I didn't want revenge. I wanted precedent. I wanted policy and prevention. And yes, accountability. It wasn't enough to expose Marlene. I was going to document her out of existence. Horse didn't knock. He never did. He just showed up around dusk, standing on my porch with that same clipboard tucked under one arm and a folded paper bag clutched in the other, like it might unravel in the wind. I opened the door. He didn't say hello. "I can't be seen," he muttered. I parked by the fire lane. "Come in." He stepped inside like a man who'd finally stopped arguing with his conscience. The last of the sunlight caught the lines in his face, deeper than I remembered, and he looked 10 years older than he had last week. "I don't have much time," he said, setting the paper bag down on the table. "She doesn't know I have this. None of them do." I didn't ask what was in it. I opened the bag slowly and pulled out a stack of forms, originals, not copies. Internal HOA notices, handwritten amendments, unsigned resolutions. All of them bore Marlene's initials in blue ink. All of them lacked secondary board approval. At the bottom of the stack was a form stamped void across the signature box, the event authorization form, this time signed by Marlene Datch. No witness, no parent, just her name, underlined twice. "She said it was symbolic," Horse said. "That the float incident wasn't a real demonstration, just a visual example for optics." "Optics don't shove a baby," I said flatly. He winced. I know that now." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a flash drive, laid it down beside the papers like it was radioactive. "What's on it?" "Audit footage, internal meetings. She made me download it from the security servers last week after your wife asked about filing a formal grievance. I wasn't supposed to keep a copy, but I did." "Why?" Horse didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted toward the living room, where the edge of Aaron's bassinet was just visible. "My grandson drowned in a retention pond 3 years ago," he said quietly. "Different state, different HOA, same kind of indifference." I didn't breathe. I took this job to feel useful. Thought if I followed rules I'd be helping. But all I've done is sign off on her messes. "You saw her rehearse it," I said. "Didn't you?" His lips tightened. "She asked me to hold the doll steady while she practiced the angle, said she wanted to show how floats fail. I didn't know she'd use a real child. I thought it was a scare tactic." "It was." Horse stepped back, like the word hit harder than he expected. "I'll give a statement," he said. "You'll need one for the board review, but I want this to go through the right channels. No media, no stunts, just truth." "That's all I've ever wanted," I said. He nodded. "Then I hope it's enough." Before he left, he paused at the door. "Oren," he said, voice low, "you're not the only one she's hurt, but you might be the first to make it stick." And then he was gone. I didn't touch the flash drive for 10 minutes. I just stared at it, the weight of it, the absurd quiet of the room pressing in from all sides. When I finally plugged it in, I opened a folder labeled Internal Review Logs. The first clip was dated 4 days before the pool incident. Marlene speaking in the boardroom, calm and rehearsed. "If he won't remove that float, we show everyone why it doesn't belong. It's a distraction, a liability. If it tips, even a little, it proves the point. Parents get emotional. Let them. They don't write policy." That was the moment it shifted, not just for me, for every neighbor who'd been silenced, for every family who thought they were alone. I backed up the files 3 times, one on my drive, one on cloud, one on a secure USB. Then I opened a new folder, Exhibit C, Pre-Incident Intent. Because the moment Marlene rehearsed the danger, she stopped being negligent. She became deliberate, and now I had her on record. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table while Mira paced between the nursery and the hallway, checking on Aaron every 30 minutes. The house was quiet, but not peaceful, just suspended, like the space between lightning and thunder. I spread everything out, Horse documents, the unsigned waivers, the audit logs, the footage from Penna, and now the flash drive with Marlene's own words. The weight of it all didn't feel satisfying. It felt surgical, cold, necessary. I wasn't building a case to punish her. I was building one to take away her platform, her authority, her credibility with the only institutions that mattered, insurance underwriters, safety oversight boards, and the state's HOA compliance division. Those were the people who could crush her legally, quietly, efficiently. I didn't need headlines. I needed revocation. At 6:17 a.m., I submitted the full complaint package through Georgia's residential governance safety portal under the whistleblower clause. Every violation, every waiver, every time-stamped discrepancy. I included a notarized statement from Mira detailing the medical trauma Erin had endured in the days since the pool incident. I attached documentation from her pediatrician about stress response and oxygen disruption. I didn't embellish, I didn't need to. The footage spoke louder than emotion ever could. Next, I submitted a separate report to the HOA's insurance provider, Mid-South Property Liability, LLC, through their community negligence portal. I knew the right language: risk exposure, systemic enforcement irregularities, premeditated conduct under the guise of policy demonstration, violation of in-house procedural standards. I attached Horst's signed confession. 30 minutes later, I received an automated confirmation. Your report has been received and escalated to internal risk assessment for review. A compliance officer will contact you within 3 to 5 business days. Then I emailed the same package to the 2 other families I'd spoken to, Delgado and Ball. No pressure, just the truth, in case they wanted to add their own statements before the board meeting next Friday. By 9 a.m., I had 6 read receipts. Mira leaned against the doorframe, watching me quietly. "Is it done?" "No," I said, "but the fuse is lit." I walked over to the cabinet and pulled out the clear plastic container that held the float, the same one Marlene had shoved with that doll, then with our daughter. The float had been rinsed, dried, and sealed since the incident, but I could still see the faint discoloration on the safety strap where Erin had vomited pool water through her nose, a pale watermark of fear. I opened the side panel and retrieved the pressure sensor core, plugged it into my reader. It still held the last submersion log. Tilt angle, 62 degree. Depth trigger, 5.7 seconds. Buoyancy loss, 14%. I saved it. Labeled it Exhibit D, Impact Data. That afternoon, I drove to the city safety office and submitted the physical media drive in person. No delay, no risk of interference. The woman behind the counter looked surprised by the size of the file. "You really documented this whole thing?" "No," I said. "She did. I just organized it." Back home, Mira handed me a slip of paper. "Penna called while you were out," she said. "She's submitting her video officially to the insurer. Said she'd testify if it came to that." I nodded, jaw tight. "It won't need to. The video alone is enough." Penna wasn't the kind to make noise, but she was meticulous. Her camera footage had timestamps, geodata, and no edits. In court, it would hold up. In a corporate risk file, it would sing. I looked at the clock. 3 days until the next HOA meeting. 3 days until Marlene stood in front of the same neighbors she'd gaslit for 2 years and smiled like nothing was cracking behind her. 3 days until that smile shattered. I zipped the case file into a portable drive, printed the submission receipt, checked everything again. The board wouldn't see me coming, because I wasn't marching into that clubhouse as a father looking for an apology. I was walking in as the system she never thought would turn against her, and this time, the bylaws weren't hers. They were mine. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday at 6 p.m., sharp. By Wednesday morning, the cracks had already started to show. The first sign came from a bulletin tacked sloppily to the community message board by the pool. Normally, those flyers were printed on thick cardstock, clipped at all 4 corners with the HOA logo stamped in gold. This one was a plain white sheet of printer paper with uneven text. Reminder: Friday's meeting will be held in the clubhouse hall, not the conference annex. Standing room only, please arrive early. Resident submissions are now closed. Closed. That meant they were trying to shut down any new complaints from the neighborhood, cut off anything that hadn't already gone through Marlene's filter. I wasn't worried. Mine hadn't gone through her. Mine had gone over her. That afternoon, I received a voicemail from a man named Troy Ellison, Senior Compliance Analyst for Mid-South Property Liability. "Mr. Kellis, we've reviewed your materials. I'll be attending Friday's meeting in a non-voting observer capacity. As a courtesy, I'm alerting you that your report has triggered a provisional risk review for Hollowcrest Haven. We encourage continued cooperation. All further updates will go through legal channels. That was corporate speak for, we're watching. One wrong word from Marlene, and her personal umbrella policy evaporates. By Thursday, the phone calls started. First the Pauls, then the Delgados, then 2 residents I'd never even spoken to, families I didn't know were paying attention. All of them had questions. What happens if she denies it? Is there a recording of what she said at the demo? Will the board protect her? The fear was still there, but so was something new: momentum. That evening, I printed and spiral-bound 3 copies of the full report. Exhibits, logs, transcribed quotes, timelines, footage snapshots. I didn't plan to hand them out. I just wanted them visible when I walked in. Let her see them. Let her guess who else had them. Let her feel what it's like to be cornered by documentation. On Friday morning, I dressed Erin in the same lavender onesie she'd worn the day of the float incident. Mira raised an eyebrow, but didn't stop me. She understood what it meant. This wasn't pageantry. It was memory, presence, proof that our daughter still lived here, still breathed this air, and still bore the silent weight of what had been done to her. I loaded the car and drove to the community clubhouse an hour early. I wasn't the first. Penna was already there, standing near the double doors, camera bag slung over one shoulder. Horst arrived a few minutes later, not even pretending to avoid my eye. He gave me a single nod, then took his place near the chairs lined against the wall. More residents poured in. By 5:45, there were over 30 people packed into the room, more than any HOA meeting in the last 5 years, according to Penna, and this time, they weren't here for landscaping updates. Marlene entered precisely at 5:58, flanked by 2 board members and a clipboard tucked tightly against her chest. She wore a crimson blazer and a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Let's begin promptly," she said, voice loud and smooth. "We have a packed agenda tonight, and as always, we ask for respect and order." She hadn't seen me yet, or maybe she had, and was pretending she didn't. But when she stepped behind the podium and adjusted the mic, her fingers trembled, not visibly, not to the casual eye. But I'd spent years reviewing security footage, learning to detect the micro-reactions in high-pressure depositions. She was rattled. Behind her, I saw something new. A man in a gray suit with a laminated visitor badge. Troy Ellison. The insurer was in the room, and Marlene had no idea just how much of her next hour was already scripted, by her own past words, her own paper trail, and the neighbors she thought were too quiet to matter. I sat in the front row. My binder rested on my lap. Mira held Erin in her arms, steady and calm, and I waited for the moment this board meeting became a reckoning. Marlene's voice rang through the clubhouse like it always did, polished, theatrical, dripping with that practiced HOA diplomacy she used to control every room she walked into. "Before we begin with resident concerns," she said, "I'd like to remind everyone that safety demonstrations, such as the one held last week, are conducted with the best intentions for our community's well-being and are fully within the board's discretionary authority." A few scattered nods. Most people just stayed quiet. She looked directly at me then, just for a moment, that smile again, thin, measured, like she thought she still had the upper hand. She didn't see what I saw from my seat, the subtle exchange happening behind her, where Troy Ellison, Mid-South's compliance analyst, handed a folded document to the HOA secretary and said something low enough that only the people in the front row could hear. Horst was standing beside the secretary. His posture stiffened the moment he read the heading. It was a formal notice. Provisional risk escalation. Internal review in progress. The moment Marlene turned back to the mic, the secretary cleared her throat. "Before we continue," she said, voice wavering slightly, "we've received notice that Mid-South Liability has opened a file on recent board activity. Mr. Ellison is here as part of a procedural audit." Marlene's smile faltered. She looked at Troy like he was a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. "This wasn't on the agenda," she said. "We have protocols for—" "Your protocols are precisely what's under review," Troy said flatly. The room shifted. Something in the air thinned. Mira tightened her grip on Erin. Penna adjusted her camera strap and slowly started recording, not even bothering to hide it. I stood up. "Marlene," I said, I have a formal statement to submit on behalf of my family. You were not approved for... You don't have the authority to approve or deny speech at a public HOA meeting, I cut in. I've submitted my materials through the proper legal channels. What I'm doing now is informing this community of what's been done in their name. Her jaw set, but she didn't stop me. She couldn't. I stepped to the front, pulled the binder from my bag, and opened it slowly. On June 4th, during a board-sanctioned event, my 6-month-old daughter was physically pushed into the community pool by HOA President Marlene Datch. This was not an accident. It was a deliberate act, rehearsed 2 days prior using a training doll, witnessed and documented by Mr. Horst Greeley, who has since provided a signed affidavit. Gasps echoed around the room. Several residents turned to each other, whispering. Marlene interrupted. That was a safety demonstration. No, it wasn't. You had no waiver, no parental consent, no emergency medical personnel present. You violated both state safety guidelines and the HOA's own bylaw, 418.3, regarding minors and aquatic events. I turned to Troy. I've submitted the footage, timestamps, inspection logs, and a complete record of selective enforcement patterns that show Marlene has consistently targeted families with medical or adaptive needs. Troy nodded once. All received, all verified. Marlene's composure began to crumble. She opened her mouth again, but Horst stepped forward this time. She told me to hold the doll steady during rehearsal, he said. Said she wanted to show what failure looked like. I didn't know she'd use a real baby. I didn't sign off on that event. No one did. Silence swallowed the room whole. It wasn't just about liability anymore. It was about betrayal, about power abused, hidden beneath policy and wrapped in red folders. Marlene turned to the rest of the board. This is a coordinated attack. You can't let them... We've already let too much slide, one board member muttered. Another stood. I moved to suspend President Datch's authority pending external review. I second, Horst said, hands raised, first one, then another, then nearly all. Marlene stepped back from the podium, blinking like the air had turned against her. Troy quietly handed the secretary a second document. Consider this your notice, he said. Until the review concludes, you are not to represent Hollow Crest Haven in any binding capacity. I looked at Mira. She didn't smile. She just exhaled. And that was enough. The reckoning had begun. Marlene didn't leave right away. She stood at the side of the podium, her blazer too stiff for the heat of the room, her lips pressed into a tight, bloodless line. It wasn't just disbelief painted across her face. It was confusion. Like the script she'd rehearsed for years had suddenly been torn from her hands. The board members didn't look at her, not one. The motion had passed, her authority was suspended, but the room didn't disperse. People stayed in their seats, the air tense, expectant, like there was still something unsaid, something unfinished. I didn't plan to speak again, but my hand rose anyway. My voice came out quieter this time, stripped of the fury that had carried it before. I'd like to read one more statement, for the record. No one interrupted. I opened the binder to the last page. Mira sat behind me, Aaron asleep in her arms. The room leaned forward as if drawn. This is a personal addendum to my earlier submission, I said. A reflection, not a complaint. I swallowed once, then read. My daughter's name is Erin. She's 6 months old. She was born after 3 years of miscarriages, 1 emergency surgery, and a stillbirth that nearly took my wife's life. She has a mild developmental delay in her left lung, which is why we were advised to begin controlled aquatic therapy. The float used in the June 4th event was designed by me, fabricated under pediatric specifications, and approved by a physician specializing in neonatal motor response. I paused to let the silence sit. The float was not a toy. It was not a stunt. It was not a disruption to neighborhood cohesion. I looked up. My voice sharpened. It was a piece of medical support equipment for a living, breathing child who has already survived more than most adults ever will. Across the room, a few neighbors shifted. One woman pressed her palm to her mouth. And in front of this community, without permission or precedent, President Datch shoved that float into the pool. She placed my daughter in direct danger for the sake of a spectacle. She called it a demonstration. I call it negligence. I call it cruelty. I call it assault. I closed the binder. But more than that, I call it a failure of leadership, and we cannot let that stand. Marlene's mouth opened, but this time no sound came out, not even a protest. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, not humiliated, not defeated, just irrelevant. Troy stood then, clearing his throat. To the residents of Hollowcrest Haven, Mid-South will be conducting a formal audit over the next 2 weeks. During this time, certain HOA functions will be frozen, including fine issuance and architectural enforcement. We strongly recommend that an interim president be selected within 10 days. Penna raised her hand. Can residents volunteer? You'll need a nomination and a second, then a vote. I nominate Horst Greeley, she said. A few people chuckled, nervously at first, but then it built. Horst stood slowly. I won't lead, he said, voice low, but I'll help you fix what's broken. It wasn't a rallying cry, but it was enough. Within minutes, a motion passed to appoint a temporary committee to draft reforms to the existing enforcement protocols. Horst would chair, Penna would document. Mira volunteered to help revise the medical exemption language in the bylaws. Marlene remained seated. No one asked her to leave, but no one looked her way again either. She sat through the end of the meeting like a ghost in her own house, watching it all slip from her hands. When the gavel finally struck to adjourn, Mira and I stood. Aaron stirred but didn't cry. We walked out slowly, through the main doors, past the bulletin board where her photo had once been pinned under a violation. It had been taken down, and in its place, someone had pinned a new sheet. Safety review pending. Do not remove infant flotation use until committee guidance is published. I stopped, read it again, and smiled. Because change doesn't always begin with anger. Sometimes it begins with documentation and ends with silence. 2 weeks later, the pool was quiet again. The caution tape was gone. The plastic closed for maintenance sign had been replaced by a new bronze plaque. This facility complies with the 2024 Safety Reform Act, dedicated to community awareness and family protection. It was small, tasteful, and permanent. Aaron's float rested beside it in a clear display case, mounted near the gate. Beneath the float, engraved in steel, were 6 words that Mira chose herself. Never again, not under our watch. It wasn't meant to be sentimental. It was a reminder. One this neighborhood couldn't escape no matter how many flowers they planted or fences they painted to forget what happened here. Horst had stepped down after the reforms passed, saying he was too old for politics. He wasn't wrong, but he'd left something behind: transparency. For the first time, every HOA policy, every violation, every vote was public record. No more hidden memos, no more closed sessions. If they wanted to fine someone, it had to go through review and resident approval. The difference was immediate. Families who had stayed invisible started returning to community events. The Balls brought their son's therapy equipment to the playground without fear. The Delgados rebuilt their railing. Penna launched a community newsletter that tracked spending, budgets, and decisions, something Marlene had always claimed would invite unnecessary scrutiny. Scrutiny was exactly what had saved us. Marlene herself had vanished, not legally, just socially. Her house went up for sale within a week of her removal. The listing was sterile, spacious lakeside property, HOA-governed community. No mention of her name, no trace of her title. Rumor said she'd moved to her sister's place near Macon, somewhere without a board to run. The irony didn't escape anyone. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the water, I stood at the pool gate, holding Aaron in my arms. The light glinted off the display case, reflecting her small face in the glass. She reached toward it, fingers pressing softly against the barrier between her and the object that had once nearly ended her life. She didn't remember, but I did. Every second, every splash, every breath Mira and I held that day when we thought we'd lost her. The float wasn't just a symbol now. It was evidence of what community accountability could look like when people finally decided fear wasn't worth their silence. Mira came up behind me and wrapped her arm around my waist. "You did it," she said. "No," I told her. "We did." She smiled, faint but real. "You think she'll ever face charges?" I shook my head. No jury could convict her for something the HOA buried before it hit the news. But she lost what she loved most: control. And that's worse than prison for people like her. The wind rustled across the water. Somewhere behind us, Penna's camera clicked. A photo for the next newsletter, no doubt. For once, I didn't mind being in it. I looked down at Aaron. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the floating reflections rippling across the pool's surface. The same water that once terrified me now shimmered calm and blue. "I used to think safety was about fences and rules," I said quietly. "But it's not. It's about people who care enough to stand in the way when someone crosses the line." Mira nodded. "Then I guess we're finally safe." I didn't answer right away, because safe felt too temporary a word for something we'd fought this hard to reclaim. But as Aaron laughed, bright and unburdened, for the first time in weeks, I decided that maybe safe was enough for tonight. When we left the pool, the lights turned on behind us, illuminating the plaque. The float glowed softly in the reflection, suspended above the water like something between memory and redemption. That night, before I turned off my laptop, I opened the last file in the case directory. Final resolution, Hollow Crest, Haven, HOA, V, closed. The status line read, liability insurance policy terminated, board reformation approved. For the first time since the incident, I deleted the backup folder. It wasn't erasure, it was closure. To everyone watching this, never assume silence means peace. Sometimes it just means someone's waiting for proof. If you've ever been bullied by power that hides behind paperwork, remember this. Documentation is louder than intimidation. Keep your records, keep your evidence, keep your voice steady. Because justice doesn't come fast, but when it comes, it's permanent. Subscribe and tell me, what would you have done if your newborn was the one she pushed?